Best of the week is fall webworms. We're starting to see them like this in the trees out and about. I mean, some years they just explode and it seems like everywhere, but this year's not too bad, but they are there.
Seems to be okay this year. I mean, we're going to have them year after year. So you're going to start noticing these. The first generation we're going to start noticing in July, Tom.
Right.
So that's kind of the first generation. They've done their thing. So after that, then they kind of go back to the tree, kind of go dormant a little bit, and then they start up the second generation, the generation we're seeing right now. They'll do that in August and September. They'll feed, and that's where we're starting to see a lot of issues or damage. Is that second generation that's defoliating trees in certain.
And we'll start seeing stuff like this once those numbers start building up again. It looks like this, and that's kind of creepy looking a little bit. You look up there and that thing is alive. It is moving. It has motion and those things are moving.
They have. So they've laid their eggs on underneath the leaves, and then that egg is kind of went to a pupa, and then they're having to feed. They're having to continue and start getting bigger and bigger. So that's where they're at right now. They're feeding. They've done a lot of feeding. Now they're kind of back into that nest, if you will, for their last part of their life.
Well, and when we're talking, we call them fall webworms. They look like this. They're not necessarily worms. They're caterpillars.
Caterpillars, yep.
But we call them fall webworms. But I mean, they're kind of cool looking when you look at them up close and individually. But as a horde of 1,000 of them, they're a little bit intimidating.
They're a little intimidating. The most of their life they'll stay within that bag or that net, that web that we showed.
Just keep expanding.
Just kind of get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then when they feed, of course, they're going to get out a little bit or get kind of move that net, move that bag or that web as they feed. So I think the next slide.
They start like this.
Yeah, this is the adult that's laid the eggs on the underside of the leaf.
The adult moth.
The adult moth.
Right.
And so that moth will lay eggs. So the first generation, May, June, they'll lay these eggs. It'll take a few days, 10 to 14 days, depending on temperature and weather. Those eggs will hatch. They will hatch and then pupate and then go into their process, feed pretty much throughout July, where we mentioned earlier that we will first start seeing them.
Right.
So then they'll kind of run that process again for that generation. Then they'll pupate.
And we start going back to this.
Then they'll start going back to this. So I guess long story short, a couple generations a year.
Right.
If we control them, if we spray them in that first generation, theory says that we will be better off, have less of a population in the fall. Right. But our neighbors don't control them, or two neighbors down don't control them. We've got a pretty high population anyway. So a lot of the times the Mother Nature controls it. Whether we're too wet, fungus gets in them and it kills them a lot, or it's too dry, desiccates them, they can't survive. So that's probably what's happened this year. Is we were pretty wet this year. So they've got too wet. They had some fungus that kind of kept them at bay, under control. Right. And so that's probably what's happened, why we're not seeing as many compared to last year and 2 years ago, where we were covered. Right. Most of our pecans, most of our walnuts were just totally covered. So good years like that, they will spread to ornamentals, different ornamental trees, whether it's oaks. They love the fruit, and then the pecan and the nuts. They've got a sweetness to those leaves that they like. So that's what's happened.
So they have
there.
a sweet tooth.
They do. And it's a good thing.
Well, and each mama can lay like 400 to 500 eggs. So you can see how if you had 400 to 500 that grew up, and then the next generation, each one of those, or half of those, I guess, of another 400 to 500 each.
It's
it can get out of control
pretty quick,
which is where we get our deforestation.
Yeah. So, birds will control them. Let's go into control. I think that. So control options. They're pretty easy to control. They've got they're soft-bodied worms or caterpillars. So any type of insecticide or even insecticide soap will kill them. But as you saw with those webs, they're protected in there. Right. So we're up there with our pump-up sprayer, getting about 15 to 20 feet in the air is about as far as we can reach with that pump-up sprayer. And then at 15 foot, it's hard to get that stream of water inside that web.
Well, we don't have the horsepower
the
to
power
penetrate
to get
that
it
web like the commercial sprayers.
That's correct. So, a pecan orchard, they have air blast sprayers that they pull, and it'll shoot air up into that canopy, which is really nice because it'll get into that, and they'll control them that way.
Right.
Control for a homeowner is not necessary. Year after year, if we defoliate early in the fall, every year, it'll kind of slow them down a little bit, the trees.
Right.
But for the most part, they're mature trees. They're not gonna be harmed by fall webworms for the most part.
Well, it's kind of unsightly. I know at the end of our street where I live, where there's a large pecan tree in their front yard, and that thing will get completely defoliated. It'll just be down to sticks, and you think, well, this tree is done. But then next spring,
pops right back.
it's back and it looks fine.
Yeah.
So the bottom line is that you're probably going to be okay. It's going to be unsightly.
Yeah.
And not look very good, but they're not going to destroy the tree.
Yeah.
Unless it's maybe a damaged
or a young tree. So
tree.
a tree you just transplanted that needs all of those leaves on there for the whole season to really get the roots established. Couple years of defoliating early could harm it. But for the most part, we don't have to worry about it. Just the sightliness is the issues. But BT works well. BT is an organic insecticide that if they are actively feeding, we spray that bacteria on the leaves. They'll feed it, consume it, and they'll quit eating that way. So BT is a great product that'll work well on these if they're actively feeding.
Right.
And then a lot of other just general insecticides will work, but we've got to have them outside that nest. We've got to have that spray get on them, and then it'll die that way. So horticultural oil or soap, horticultural soap, insecticide soap will work too. The trick on any of this is get it inside that web.
Get it inside.
Yep.
I've heard some people say if you break up those webs to let the birds in, but I don't know. Is that?
Yeah, I mean it can work. Just depends on your birds. If you've got a lot of birds around, they will feed. But they'll what the birds see them, and they'll get into that webbing, and then they'll fly away. They won't eat them very well. But if they get it exposed, there's a possibility. But if you go through the trouble of pulling those webs, spray some soapy water on there, and that should help them and get them killed that way.
Or if, like in our first slide, when it was just a smaller batch, if you start to see that, just cut that branch off,
take it
away.
Get
get rid of it, and you've eliminated the threat, so to speak.
So think ahead. Mark your calendar down. If you're starting to see them in June and July, try to treat them, and then that'll help you later on in the fall. And I think we'll be fine. I mean, it's one of those that happens every year, and it's unsightly, but it's not going to hurt anything.
One of my favorite stories was some gal walked into our diagnostic center one day, and we were talking about fall webworms, and she said she actually gets a broom, sticks it up in there, and kind of winds it up like cotton candy, pulls it out, and then dumps it in the trash. I was like, well, okay,
whatever works.
If it works for you, that's
works.
fine.
Yep.